At T-Mobile, our critical mission is providing unparalleled 5G coverage for when connectivity is mission critical. Introducing T-Priority, America's best 5G network experience for first responders, even in times of congestion. More capacity, faster speeds, better coverage. T-Priority from T-Mobile, built for tomorrow's emergencies, ready today. Discover more at t-priority.com.
For qualifying organizations on eligible rate plans, coverage not available in some areas and may be impacted by emergencies.
How many notes does a hen usually make? A hen mallard usually make?
Across all the decrescendos that we reported, about 5 notes was the average. Now they ranged from like 3 notes to like one hen that did like an 18 note.
I still have that recording somewhere on a computer, and I play it for people once in a while, and it's insane.
Outside,
people have heard them out there, like they just go on and on and on.
I just think that was only something that happened in competition calling where you heard that. Now they still don't do the,
Ducks don't hail call?
Yeah, they.
Are you kidding me?
The highball, and they don't do that.
In this episode of the Kitchen Conversations, we meet with James Callicutt, duck call maker, duck call researcher, and teacher at Mississippi State University to talk about what makes a good duck call. We dissect duck hunting and duck habitat and moist soil management 101. We also discuss the lack of ducks in Mississippi around New Year's of last year and our collaborative history as duck people in duck country. Have a listen. It's truly important that we know that duck people across duck country care passionately about ducks and duck habitat conservation. James is one of the best. Remember that in the coming month of April, we will release a 4-part series on wetland management. Remember to listen in to find out how to feed and attract more ducks during fall through spring with a focus on putting more ducks in front of your duck blind. The Foul Weather Podcast aims to entertain and inform. The Wetland Management Series is sure to inform and help you see more ducks in front of your duck blind. Welcome back to the Kitchen Conversations. At the Foul Weather Podcast, we truly believe that the kitchen is the perfect place for sharing information, spending time with family and friends, and genuinely BSing about life, ducks, the science of duck migration, duck conservation, and duck hunting itself. At either home or camp, the kitchen is a place to celebrate the day and come together to learn from each other, but also simply enjoy life. The Foul Weather Podcast aims to use the Kitchen Conversations as a way to bring duck science with duck science people directly to you in raw form. But we also aim to simply talk with duck people across duck country as well. Very often you're going to notice that the duck science people are also duck people from across duck country. Just think about that for a second. Most of the people that work very hard to conserve duck habitat and ducks themselves are also duck hunters from across duck country. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Kitchen Conversations.
This is another episode of the Kitchen Conversations from the Foul Weather Podcast. We're here with James Callicutt, who's a longtime friend since I worked with him at Mississippi State. Actually, it's kind of funny to, we end up working together over time, but you were a student in the first ecology and management of waterfowl class I taught with Rick Kaminsky. We're at James's camp in Tutwiler, Mississippi, longtime family camp. We'll talk about that too.
Yeah.
And but James, welcome, and thanks for being on the Kitchen Conversations.
Yeah. Well, Mike, it's good to have you back in the South for a little bit, and I'm excited to visit with you today. I appreciate you letting me be on.
Yeah, and tell everybody how our duck hunting's been.
That'll be a quick story about how duck hunting has been. Pretty slow, but that seems to be the story across the region right now.
Yeah, it's pretty sad. I mean, I've been telling people on the podcast that I'm traveling with my neighbor Sean. He's here in the kitchen. Sean, say hello.
Hello again.
And but I keep touting we're doing this Missouri, then Mississippi, and then Texas coast thing. And Missouri was a bust. I kind of knew that was going to be. It was slow. We didn't draw out at Duck Creek, and then we had to hunt my buddy's lease, and he's been slow. And this is the epicenter of the dry right now, if you look at the map. And James, you pumped up a nice section of woods we hunted today. But just conditions in general around here for even holding birds. You want to let everybody know how it's been?
Super dry, and even, kind of usually in dry years here, you kind of rely on the folks that have pumping capabilities, to have water to hunt, and then the natural kind of breaks and sloughs and things, just the semi-permanent wetlands out there on the landscape. And this year, those, sloughs they may get low even in dry years, but they usually have water, huntable water. Birds are using them, and they are like bone dry. So a lot of the there's just not much. There's way less water on the landscape than there is in a typical year. Even in our past, what we would have considered dry years, way below that. So it's been real tough from a wetland availability standpoint for birds. So it's tough going as far as what's available to them here.
Yeah, and I mean, we left New York and it was 50, and we're here and it's 62 today, but, getting down to freezing at night, but it's just not enough to even push birds in. And as Sean and I drove, out of Memphis and coming down through here and getting into Mississippi, there's just dry sloughs. There's cypress trees just sitting high and dry, the little trickles of water and stuff. And so it's just even hard to attract birds to an area in general. So sure. I feel for everybody. We're in the middle of it. I kind of, I was thinking about pulling the plug on this trip, and then I was like, no, I want to do it. I kind of want to see it anyway, I guess. So we are in we're New Year's Eve, right? Yep. So whenever this comes out for folks, because we might not run these like right away, right? It's going to take a while to edit them and things like that. And we might run them kind of later, maybe even to February, just to give people a feel for what season was like and such. But I don't even know if I'm going to make it to Texas. As James knows, I've been bitching about my truck. I got to check engine light on, and we'll see if we even get back north. But yeah, we may skip on the Texas thing this year and end up having to unfortunately do it next year, because that's still another 12 hours from here. So we'll get that one figured out. But James, just give how we got to know each other. I mean, I talked about you were a student in that class, but then our research together, and then how we stayed friends and how many years. That's been 2008 we would have met probably. Mm-hmm. So the whole, I guess, just the general progression of our relationship, and then we'll get into what you do professionally now after graduating from Mississippi State University.
Yeah, you 2008.
I think so. That's when I co-taught. Right. The fall, because I showed up in August of 2008, and then you were in that class right away that year?
Yep, because I had just finished up a summer working at Delta Waterfowl up in North Dakota, and I remember I came back from school that semester, and you had shown up to start work there, and I was taking waterfowl that last semester in my undergrad, and you co-taught.
Oh, that's right. You were in your undergrad still. You weren't. That wasn't even part of your grad degree. Yeah, yeah.
And then, started grad school, and, you were on my committee and got to start working there. And, of course, beyond that, many years, through those 2 years, many hunting adventures together, and becoming real close friends. And but then since both, fledging from Mississippi State.
Oh, nice use of the word fledging.
and moving on, had a lot of opportunities to continue to work together and stay in touch, and still seeing each other at conferences and flyway meetings and things. And so it's been nice that we've been able to stay in touch. But this is the first time in 15 years that we've gotten to actually share a blind together and hunt. So it's been really cool to
it's cool. It's so that's what makes this. And Sean's along, and he said, "Boy, it'd be sure good to shoot a duck, but I'm having fun, right?" And that's what I told my wife too. I'm like, boy, it's good to see. I saw my old friend in Missouri and get to see you and meet some of your family here too at camp. Yeah. And it's been a fun trip. We also, so during your time, we'll get into the duck call thing you did. So for those of you that aren't aware, James Callicutt's kind of a big deal. He likes to say it that way. It's just a fun kind of comment that James always brings up. But he kind of is. He's one of the only people that I know that has ever published research on duck calls and how different types of duck calls do or do not sound like ducks. Double reeds, single reeds, different types of woods. So we'll get into that. So James and I are co-authors on that paper. Rick Kaminsky was your main advisor.
Yes.
Now Rick was at Clemson and now retired emeritus from Clemson. James and I also worked on a bunch of side projects at the same time. It was just like, I think all the stars aligned with who was there, right?
Yeah.
Tell us about so the book is I'm the lead author. What is it? Moist soil plants of the Mississippi Alluvial Valley?
Yeah,
there you go.
The moist soil wetland plants of the Mississippi Alluvial Valley.
Yeah, and the experience there with co-authors and how all that came together in general.
And that was a really cool thing that just kind of organically we started, and it really was cool because we were several of us in the lab at that time. Were doing some research around moist soil wetlands, and part of that included identifying the plants, and we were carrying 6 different plant ID books around to encompass all the plants that we were trying to identify and collecting, and so it's like, well, there really should be a book out there that has like all these, and it'd be real helpful to folks like us, and then wetland managers, people who need to identify these plants. And so we're like, well, heck, why don't we do it? And so it was just really cool that you and I and Heath and Sarah and Josh just started kind of taking a ton of photos and starting to pull that together. And when we were doing it, I thought when we started doing it, I thought we were going to put together this
our own guide
for it, and then wound up actually getting it published. And now it's used by managers, landowners. It's in plant ID classes. I was walking down the hallway the other day. One of the professors going to teach a lab, and they had that book in their hand, and I was like, "Oh, that's pretty cool."
On Amazon, like during the right time of year, because there's not just Mississippi State, but I think there's other universities in the Southeast that are using it. And every once in a while, like I look on Amazon, it's like Googling your own name, right? You look at the book and where it's at, and it's like in the top 100 plant books for Amazon. Like every once in a while, like when it first came out, everybody bought, but then once people get a copy of it, they've got it, and it's going to be on their bookshelf for a while. But no, it's really neat. And during my tenure process, like that was the thing that went in my box. Like you print off all your papers that you've published and all this, and I was like, man, this is. Like, if I could look back at my career and working with y'all, it's probably going to be, like, one of my bigger accomplishments. Because from an extension standpoint, like a landowner habitat management, a lot of people are using it.
I was going to say, that was my first time to do something that was kind of that outreach type of publication, that, a real extension, putting a resource in the hand of folks that needed that information on the ground. And I kind of lit my pilot light for doing that type of work, which is it led me to where I am now.
Which is where you are now, and we'll get to that as well. I'm going to put you on the spot, and hopefully we can get Kaminsky to listen to this. I don't know if he's listened to the podcast. I sent it to him a few times, and I don't know if he hates it or what. But he hasn't mentioned anything. He sends me all kind of stuff all the time, calls me on the phone, but doesn't mention the podcast. He might not, podcast world tends to be like this 25 to 35 age in general that listen to him. Anyhow. Define moist soil management, because we said moist soil plants of the Mississippi Alluvial Valley, but the podcast runs everywhere east of the Rockies, and not everybody might understand what moist soil plants are or moist soil management. So just a quick on that one.
They're just real quick and easy. Kind of the way I just explained it to landowners is that ask about what do I mean by that, and it's just that you're managing the managing water levels and soil disturbance to keep the conditions that are optimal for growing these early successional, so grasses and sedges, that type of vegetation. Keep that as the main kind of vegetation that you're going for, and so using water manipulation to keep those moist soil conditions that these plants respond to, and then using soil disturbance, something like disking, to set back that succession and keep it in that early successional stage of grasses and sedges, and not letting it continue to grow into more shrubby and into woody.
So early successional plants being, it's just easy to say weeds for the most part.
Yeah, and that's really what it is weeds.
Like if you look at what grow, like if you till your lawn up, plant a garden, you don't get a lot of weeds the first year. But boy, once those seeds get in there, that second, anybody who's had to deal with weeds popping up around their carrots or anything, almost all of those are moist soil plants that would grow. Those are the drier and usually moist soil plants, right? And the term moist soil too, I tried to change it to annual plant management areas because they're mostly these annual plants that produce a lot of seed that has a lot of nutritional value for ducks. And we're talking dabbling ducks mostly, right? Like our puddle ducks. Yeah. But a lot of people, you ask them like, "What's a duck eat?" And they're like, "Shit, I don't know, corn, bread." It just like it never quite gets there. But a lot of what they're feeding. I mean, they're feeding on like deeper water wetland plants and stuff like that, right? Like perennial plants. Mm-hmm. But the biggest thing I think people don't understand is that a lot of the stuff that ducks have fed on over the years is they're always in these, wetlands are these dynamic systems that get wet and get dry.
Yeah.
And when they dry out in the summer, all these plants grow. Yeah. And moist soil management is just like managing the water and the soil disturbance for that plant community that produces plants that produce a ton of seed that these ducks have eaten for thousands of years.
So we're essentially mimicking kind of like the same thing that happens in a beaver wetland. Right. It goes dry and it starts to go dry in the spring into the summer and creating those mud flat conditions, those moist soil type areas. So we're just kind of mimicking that natural wet dry cycle of these wetlands, and to encourage those same type of plants that would happen in that more natural functioning setting, just doing it.
This episode is brought to you by Prime Video. In the small town of Holland, Michigan, nothing is ever what it seems. Behind the tulip festivals and pretty houses lay dark secrets that threaten to tear a marriage apart. Nicole Kidman stars in this darkly twisted thriller about a wife and mother whose quest to uncover her husband's secrets may get her more than she bargained for. Holland, streaming on Prime Video, March 27th.
And it's, as we said, we were talking about this, it's not rocket science.
No.
Like you literally... You take the water off the right time of the year during the growing season when it starts to get warm. You don't take all the water at once. Yeah. And then you let shit grow, and you might mow some openings, and then you put boards back in a water control structure, and you flood it. I work with a lot of people that try to just church it up way too much. And I'm like, no, it's way easier than that.
It is, and to some extent it isn't. Like the basic principles of it are super simple, but it's like... not the exact prescription works every single place. Right. Those same basic tenets of moist soil management don't change. The slow drawdown, the soil disturbance, those are always going to stay the same. But it's kind of like that. You have to figure out those little nuances of your particular site. What's in the seed bank? What's going on there? Like when I draw down at this time of the year, being a good record keeper, being cognizant of like what was the other environmental conditions that were going on at that time. So it turned off super dry like shortly after that drawdown time. So you don't just rule out, well, drawing down at that time at that speed, it's just that screwed me up. I got crap afterwards. Well, maybe it just because it got super hot after
just
that.
Just
the year effect kind of thing. Yeah. So that's some little bit of figuring out the little nuances of things and making sure when you make management decisions and you see the response, you think about the other things that are going on, why you may have resulted in that particular response. So,
and we talked about this before, and we're going to cover it here. Like, I'm going to ask you, this is like the hook to keep people listening later. There's other cool shit later. But like, what are the main few mistakes that managers make? And you just started talking about through this, and I thought of one myself, and I think it's that, you actually don't go back to your wetland enough and see what's going on. Like coffee weed, says Bainey.
Yeah.
If that stuff is knee high, you probably should run a spray rig over it and kill it with a broadleaf herbicide, because you come back a week later and it's 95 degrees and it's going to be like at your shoulder. I mean,
exactly.
It grows.
That summer monitoring,
of
your wetland is a huge part of it, and because if you can catch those problematic weeds, like you said, when they're really just starting to come up, because I mean you can see when a coffee, or Sesbania is like 2 or 3 inches tall, you can tell that's what it is, and you can hit it with, some broadleaf, herbicide, And
it won't kill your grass.
It won't kill your grass.
Right.
You know, a selective herbicide for broadleaf plants, and then that'll release that grass from that competition with that broadleaf species and do better. So, like you said, it'll get away from you real quick if you don't hit it at the right time.
But we always have to say this, right? Like, whenever you talk about herbicides, pesticides, I'm like, you know, if you need an herbicide applicator's license, follow your state regulations. Like, I always put these caveats
and
in
label
here.
rates and all
label
that
rates, all you got to follow all the directions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it is, you can do it very wrong as well.
For sure.
It's environmentally damaging, or just doesn't give you the result, and you wasted a bunch of money too.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And
So,
but yeah, that summer monitoring is a huge thing.
yeah.
Really stressed.
But it's hotter than H at that time of year, and some people are like, I ain't going out there. And that's the problem, is like those times a year when you don't go out there, and it's like a 2-3 week period and you haven't looked at it. I mean, I think you should go, you know, get your coffee, go Sunday morning after church or whatever, and have a look at it, you know, or Saturday morning when you're not going to church, and you know, you can get there a little earlier when it's still cool. But yeah, try to keep an eye on it.
Lay eyes on it on a fairly regular basis, and that can help you solve problems before they become a problem, really, you know.
The other cool project we worked on, and oh, by the way, James is in our paper on duck calls has been cited a whole 2 times. It's not like one of those things that is, right, there's not a lot of people running around going, I wonder how much an Osage orange with a double reed sounds like a duck compared to a red oak with a single reed. But your one paper that really got cited, that was kind of like a side project that we worked on with a couple colleagues, was the diet paper. You want to just talk briefly about what that was? I think that's like my 5th highest cited paper. I mean, it's I think it's impacted research quite a bit on what ducks eat. So.
Yeah, and so that was a really, and I can't really recall how I think we had another project idea in mind, and we started digging through diet literature, I think, to just try to kind of find out, you know, we were building that matrix of, you know, different wetland types that ducks use, and then what type of foods they were consuming in them, and then we were finding, like,
it was part of the book. It was supposed to be part of the book.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what it was. Yeah. That's where we started it.
And
was
so,
like, what did ducks really eat? Because that's what our other co-author wanted in there, Heath.
Yeah.
Was like a thing about like the quality of the duck, not just ID for the duck foods,
right.
but he wanted, is it really duck food?
Yeah.
And we were going to go to the
that's
literature
right,
and
cause
find
everyone wants to know. Everybody asks the question, you know, what do ducks prefer? You know, and so what are they selecting for out there? Like specifically certain food items and one or others. So we're like, okay, well, we'll dig through the literature and find out, you know, and really saw that done a ton of diet work, because obviously diet, you know, what a critter eats is like the first thing to look at to understand, you know, just the basics of
basics of habitat management,
biology, and its habitat use and how to manage for them. And so there's tons of it out there, but just in the older kind of, we've been doing it. I think that was the first study, that one of the first published studies was like 1918, somewhere around World War I, and tons of diet work since then, but there just wasn't a whole lot of where they had you know, collected birds and simultaneously, and also sampled the habitat to see like where they were feeding, where they were collecting them, you know, how much of food was available. And so there's lots of information on what ducks eat, but not as much information on did they prefer this.
Are they actually selecting for different types of things?
So is there, if they're, you know, are they selecting, like, say, millet disproportionate to its availability out there? You know, there's very little of it, but they're still eating more of it than they are these other things that are more readily available around.
Yeah, and I think that the other, what was that other thing, like, the old ones used to use gizzard sand, because they're easy to get,
and hunter collected birds, and so they were, you know, folks were going out, you know, and you know, hunters were coming to check stations or going to, you know, processors or something, and they were collecting gizzards and from those birds, and so not really knowing where those birds had been foraging from. So that, and then also the gizzard, where it's a lot of those food items have already broken down before they get to that.
So for listeners, if you're not aware, ducks birds in general don't have digestive juices. There are some exceptions, but ducks do not have digestive juices really at any major strength. So they grind all their food up in their gizzard. They eat rocks and then grind it up. Well, if you take a gizzard sample you really undervalue soft food items because like
They've already
hard
broken down.
items are left.
Yeah.
So you actually have to get a food sample that's from, people say crop, but technically it's wrong. It's the esophagus and what's called the proventriculus. So it's everything before the gizzard, and it just sits there for a while before it goes into the gizzard, and that gives you a true measure. But it's really hard to get that sample because you almost have to collect a bird that's actively feeding because it doesn't sit in that area very long. So, but what we called that, like the food preference paradigm or something. The idea was that we constantly throw around this idea of like, this is what ducks eat or prefer to eat, and we really don't have that information. I'd say to this day we don't have that information that well. We know what they eat, but we don't know what they technically
there's a little bit. There's a few studies that we saw, and since then, there's been a few more, but still probably more to.
Like Sarah's stuff and Ed Farley's stuff when he was working on his master's at the Montezuma area where we live now, to get an assessment of the quality of the wetlands as forage, there's no measure of that among different types of plants. So we literally go to biologists and say, how would you rank this plant? And it's like professional opinion. Like, we really don't have that empirical evidence from ducks. Like, ducks, this is really like the highest quality thing they could eat.
Yeah.
So, although I could tell you, like, if you grew barnyard grass like millet, wild millet, I think it's just a big seed with a ton of energy in it, and we kind of find it in a lot of samples. So that's one I always tell people, like, you can, at least for mallards and bigger ducks, if you can grow that, you're good. So, so that's cool. This is what I liked about your master's degree, James, is you did, and any students that are listening to this, any wildlife students that are listening to this, they're going on to do graduate degrees, don't just do your one project. Like, if you have opportunities to grab a hold, if you've got the time. First of all, listen to your advisor. Do what your advisor tells you to do.
For sure, that's probably number one.
Because I'm not your advisor. I advise other students, but I'm not your advisor. Unless you're one of my students, and then do what I say. But, take side projects on, because I think you built out a really cool resume from those other things you did.
For sure, because the main project, and then doing that diet work on the side, and the moist soil, plant book. Yeah. Those two were not part of, what I signed up to do, just as my one master's project. And I feel like that was huge for me as far as a, resume booster and just the experience and all the things I learned doing that. I mean, it was, wildly beneficial to me, moving forward for sure. And so I'd encourage folks, if you have the flexibility with your advisor to do that, to seek out those opportunities and take advantage of them.
I mean, I know some master's students that are just ate up with a project and it's multifaceted, and there's just no time for that. Like, that happens too. Yeah.
For sure.
So let's do the duck call one then. Okay. Like the details of the duck call, because I think folks are gonna be really interested on like what the findings were. Like when you don't sound like a duck, why is it? And then also, like, what combinations of wood and reeds work? I mean, a lot of people are blowing acrylic stuff now, but you ran different types of wood, and we collaborated with the forestry department on this too, which is cool.
Yeah, it was a very interesting project. It was a collaborative project between the Wildlife Fisheries and Aquaculture Department there at MSU, as well as the Forest Products Department, which is now our Sustainable Bioproducts Department. And then physics and astronomy also too. So
that's right.
The acoustics portion of it. So it was a really cool cross-disciplinary kind of collaborative project, and so real unique in that respect. But it was really cool. We spent a couple of winters getting out and actually recording as many, female mallards out there calling as possible, and then recruited duck callers from around campus and elsewhere, solicited those folks from a lot of different places to come and listen to one of those recordings of a hen, and then try to mimic that hen using both a single reed and then a double reed of several different material types. And so we did the ones that at the time we could see as if you looked at a Max Prairie Wings or a Cabela's or whatever, catalog, what the most popular, what were most duck calls made out of. And so that time, most of them were acrylic, Osage orange or Bodock, Cocobolo and Bacote. So those two exotic kind of woods, the native Osage and then acrylic. And then there were a few black, like walnut calls as well.
Like real low wood density calls that you typically don't even see.
Yeah,
and they don't even exist.
Yeah,
so
then we just kind of grabbed this, what we could just as much different other types that we could source at the time to make a few. So we wound up getting to try to get that spectrum of different wood properties, beyond what just aesthetically, obviously, an Osage orange, a Bacote, and Cocobolo make beautiful calls, and so that's probably the first reason they were chosen, to make calls out of. But we also used pecan, poplar, even red oak, white oak, and then walnut. And there were a fair amount of walnut calls that some companies were making at the time, but as far as you didn't see pecan and the red oak and white oak and poplar for sure.
Kind of trying to focus maybe too possibly on like woods, native trees in Mississippi that could be used in the duck call industry that hadn't been previously.
Exactly.
So,
we had, I made duck calls and started making duck calls in high school with a buddy of mine, and so we took one of the calls that we had made and had it mapped out and had all those calls from all those different woods and the acrylic made with automated lathes and mills. So we were, one call, it's just like the other one. Same thing with the reeds, cut those out uniformly, and so randomly, selected. Every caller used every wood or material reed combination at some different random order and randomized which hen they listened to and tried to mimic, and did in an outdoor setting, kind of as closely possible to the conditions that we recorded the hens under. And it was pretty cool once we started actually getting the data and analyzing it and starting to plot it, and saw like the mallards really clustered pretty tight together.
Like a mallard sounds like a mallard.
Mallard sounds like a mallard. Yeah, exactly. And duck callers, as you can imagine, were all over the board. But yeah, the mallard and our little kind of confidence ellipse around that, and looked at what duck calls kind of fell within that, or I don't want to get into all the statistics and discriminant function analysis.
You don't for this crowd. You don't want to get deep into please do not.
No, mostly we don't need to get into multivariate statistics today. So we looked at which one were the most fell into that mallard ellipse, for the best way of saying it. Kind of fell right in the middle of those mallards, overlap with them as far as all the different acoustical metrics that we measured from those sound recordings. And it was interesting, even though duck callers were all over the map with it. When you see it plotted, there's definitely were ones that stood out that even in the least skilled caller out of the lot of them, still that if they had one or two that were fell in the mallard ellipse,
right,
those were still the ones that the other folks, their top ones were all this. The top calls across most of the callers, the closest to the mallards or were acoustically indistinguishable from mallards, were kind of the same.
Consistent among
callers. And so, ranking those out. And then when working with the Sustainable Bioproducts Department to kind of look at wood properties, we looked at hardness and give us an idea of density of the wood, did a hardness test of all the material types, and the harder materials were among the best performing duck calls for sounding like a duck. So, and then we also found that as far as reeds go, double reeds over singles. And single reeds are easier to blow for like a new experienced duck hunter usually. Would you say what? Singles are easier to blow than doubles? Double reeds. Doubles are easier. Just because it's easier for you to get that raspier kind without breaking. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And so, which is kind of what I kind of expected going into it, was at least on the reed side. I had no idea where to think on like the wood, material type. So, so Osage, Cocobolo, Bacote, and Osage orange were right up there at the top. So in addition to being very aesthetically pleasing looking call, they're really hard, dense woods, and they more often than not were acoustically indistinguishable from the mallards with a double reed, and they were also on the single reed the highest rank.
So Bacote and Cocobola are like South American.
Yeah, exotic.
And Osage Orange is a native one, and we don't get a lot of them in New York. They're also called horse apple, right?
Yep.
So I don't even know what that thing's useful for, isn't it? Like horses don't eat that damn thing. It's like a leftover thing, like some big old dinosaur-looking herbivore thing probably ate that. I don't know. But a really cool tree with cool wood. We get a few of them. We actually have a few in our neighborhood in New York. I don't know if they're planted or what. I think we do. We might be like right at the northern edge of the range. But there's a lot of them here. Right?
Oh yeah, a lot of them here. And super hardwood. People used to use them as fence post cattle producers all the time. Used to use them as fence. Really common for them to use as fence posts for their cattle fences.
And I kind of got set in over the years with like a few duck calls. I still got one of, and just for listeners too, James was turning duck calls for years out of his parents' garage or house or shop or whatever it was, and made a really nice call. That was also the time when like everybody started doing it.
Yeah.
And I kind of agree with you, like bailing on it and not doing it, because it seemed like everybody that could get a lathe or anything had a business doing it. But I just have a few things on my lanyards now, my duck calls that are my typical ones I take out, and so I don't like leaf through in any of the catalogs. I just go right by them. But Osage Orange, is it actually used in like the industry or not really?
Yeah,
is it pretty regularly?
It is still. Okay. I think it is still. I haven't flipped through there to see now recently, but I think it's still a pretty fairly staple one across a lot of them. Even in the main, stream in the catalog, where it's certainly used a lot by your custom call makers, those folks out there like that. Yeah. Also, too, red oak and pecan also are another one that perform pretty decent. And
we don't see that as much used.
No, I mean you don't hardly see anybody. And on the low end, it was the poplar was like dead last, and walnut down there, but pecan and red oak. And red oak actually double reed.
It was right up there.
It was right up there, right below Osage Orange.
I think it is something. There's some weird thing with the porosity. Like it's hard, but it's got all those pores in it. Yeah. So I think if you sealed it fine, you'd be okay. But I think when it gets wet, like that's something we couldn't throw it all these into all these conditions.
Well, it's kind of that because it's had that open porous kind of thing happening, but that also on the tone board. It's not closed porous, it kind of made it bumpy. Oh. And we always wondered if that had something to do how the reed vibrated on the tone board, because it had those lines from where those pores were across it when it was cut like that.
That's neat.
So we didn't have any way of really testing that, but that was just some speculation of why that might have sounded a little different than say the white oak call that may have had very similar some similar properties outside of the pore structure being really different between those two.
And as we talk about this, I feel really guilty because I've got a friend of mine who's actually on the Ducks Unlimited local chapter committee with me. My wife and I are on like 3 different chapters because there's a student chapter where I teach, and then my buddy runs like a hunters thing, and then there's this other one that we run. But this guy at the one at Skinny Atlas Lake in New York there, he just started making his own calls. The guy's done just about everything in the world, but he turned his own barrels and he kind of did like the metal rings and stuff on it, and I think he was just buying like rich and tone inserts to go with it. But they blow great, and I've won like 7 of them. And so I've just gotten lazy, so I'm on acrylic, which makes me feel super lazy about it, like because I should go through like how I like play around with these wood calls and stuff, but boy, the acrylic still does.
Oh yeah, and that was the thing I totally forgot about acrylic because it was in the mix too.
Oh, was it?
Yeah,
well, it wasn't as good, or
no, it was. It was right up there towards the top because it's super dense, obviously, so it performed right up there with the top 3 woods.
Now, among people, what was the reason? Like among the different types of, we're not getting into physics, obviously, but different. And pitch is something that I think most people can understand. Whether it's raspy or squeaky, sounds like somebody's blowing a party toy. What is it about the
most of the calls that made people not sound like a duck or sound like a duck, like among the things you measured?
Yeah. So definitely, I think that amount of like rasp, and we measured a lot of different metrics, and pitch and entropy was another one that we measured. And entropy is kind of like the harshness of the sound, so kind of like how raspy it is.
Yeah.
Those seem to be really influential in determining which colors. So if those colors were able to put some voice behind it and get that
so
right
the
rasp.
raspiness.
Yeah, and that's the reason obviously double reads. It's easier to get that rasp than single reads. And so that's why that performed a little better. But yeah, those hunters that were, or callers that were able to put a little bit more voice and get that rasp really made them closer. And also the call, how they structured the call, like, so when I mean structure, like how they delivered those notes. So
decrescendo is the thing that a hen does. It's technically a music term. Go through. You can make sounds too if you have to get this through. We didn't bring duck calls into the kitchen.
We probably should have.
It'd be kind of it's already going to sound super hollow anyway. But I don't. It ain't. I don't. This isn't meant to be like high quality studio stuff. So
Camp Stump does not exactly have.
No, you don't have
recording
sound.
studio.
You don't have
vibe here. Yeah.
I don't know. The lighting's pretty good.
Oh yeah.
Deer racks. It's not. It's got some ambiance to it. So there. How many notes does a hen usually make? A hen mallard usually make?
So yeah, we looked at that, and across all the crescendos that we recorded, about 5 notes was the average. Now they ranged from like 3 notes to like one hen that did like an 18 note.
I still have that recording somewhere on a computer, and I play it for people once in a while, and it's insane.
Outside,
people have heard them out there, like they just go on and on and on.
I just think that was only something that happened in competition calling where you heard that. Now they still don't do the,
Ducks don't hail call?
Yeah,
Are you kidding me?
The highball, and they don't do that. But actually did record one hen, that had like
18 notes.
18 notes was the most notes.
Did they like start dragging out at the end like she was running out of breath?
Yeah, so that's the kind of what the decrescendo, like you said, it's a musical term, and it's, decreasing in volume as the notes go on. Starting out with loud and forceful, and kind of getting quieter and less forceful as you move along. So a long, loud first note, and as that hen's the as long as the air is deflating from their lungs are deflating, they're shortening those notes as they go. So you get that really first note that's really long and loud, and each note getting a little shorter and a little quieter as it goes down. Like
somebody had to do it.
Yeah, somebody. And I think that was one thing we were wondering. Like, okay, well, there's one particular caller that, like, I think maybe Poplar single reed was like the only one where he wasn't classified as a mallard. All the rest of them, everything that didn't matter. He was, but he was closer to the center of that mallard ellipse with the Bodoc and the Osage and the Cocobola and the acrylic. Yeah. But even with that Poplar double reed, he was like in the edge of it, and
so he even sounded a little bit like a duck, even with probably the crappiest
call.
Stuff you could put together to make a call.
And looking at his versus others, so we produced like a spectrogram, an audio spectrogram, where you could visually see the notes of the call, and looking at all the callers across, and then looking at actual spectrograms from those hens. It was real evident, like that note structure, like he did the same thing that hens do, that long first note, and then cutting his notes off shorter
as you go
as he went. And you'd look at a lot of the other callers, and they were getting quieter as they went through, but the note length was like exactly almost the same note length across. And so it was maybe to our ear, or even to the bird's ear, may not make a hill of a bean's difference. But as far as looking at that level of acoustic metrics, So that's obviously, affecting that average of measuring those metrics over those notes across that,
Yeah,
if you're not structuring your call the same way, it's going to throw that average kind of off, and that's kind of where a lot of that.
That's a good comment, and I don't mean to cut you off, but it's like, I fancy myself a reasonable caller, not great all the time, right? I was chatting with you earlier, sitting out on the porch here, and I love it when like a hen goes over and then you can hit your call to just like hammer back at her, and you're like, man, I sound like a duck. But then about 5 minutes later, I feel like if you're not hearing that constantly, like it's hard to hit those notes correct. And there's probably so much out there that's about when you call and how loud you call, and more so than maybe how much you sound. Like people listening to this might be like, man, it sounds like it's really hard to sound like a duck, which is probably true. But that is an interesting question in of itself. Do you really have to?
Yeah.
The really good callers, I think they do better. In the long run, they do better. But a lot of it's about like, you don't hammer on the call when they're right over you. You look at their wingtips, you see what they're doing, and you could just blow your duck call all the time at every bird you see, like some people do, which is like the most annoying thing. And for young people out there that are listening to this, you don't have to blow your duck call at every duck. Like if it's not coming near you, you can just watch it fly by. Believe it or not, you can. Although like on slow days like today, you're gonna blow your duck. Like, I'm gonna blow my duck call on something.
I think we did that with white fronts several times a
White
day.
white fronts were giving us the middle primary today.
Yeah,
so,
we need to yodel at any of them that lead.
Hey, they might have done it.
Yeah.
They might have done it. They've seen it. There's more white fronts here than when I was even here though years ago. So they've moved east for sure. So cool stuff on the duck call. If people have questions about duck calls in general too, I mean, you can send stuff in to me at drmike@foulweather.co. I can pass them on to James, and we'll see what we can answer for you, because it's a fun topic. I think we scratched the surface of it. Like everything on the podcast, I feel like I say we're just scratching the surface of this, but. And
there's an article that just came out in the new this month's February issue of DU that on the study that Rick emailed us and was like,
I'm writing this. He said, I'm writing this.
We should
you guys want to be part of it?
Yeah. I'm really glad that he did that, because, I mean, it's been a long time since that study, and we never had, we published it in the scientific literature, but
that doesn't get to the public.
Yeah, but that doesn't, exactly. It needs to get to the public, and so this was good that he got us rallied together to put that out there, so we could just came out, and so be a good read, get a little bit more
it's kind of
detail.
On that front, like understanding waterfowl.
Yeah,
it's in that
it's
section.
That section,
So on reaching out to the public and getting information to the public, which I think the Foul Weather Podcast is part of that. I've gotten emails from a lot of folks that are like, this is the most informative, duck hunting podcast that I've found. So I appreciate those comments. I don't know if it's true, because I don't listen to every duck hunting podcast. I listen to a lot, but I don't listen to all of them. But James, so you worked with Mississippi State as a research associate. You did work with Ducks Unlimited for a while. You worked for the state, Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks, MDWF&P, and now you're back at Mississippi State. Tell us about your position, and then, as far as getting information out to the public, what that role is that you have at Mississippi State.
So, like I said, I was a waterfowl program biologist with MDWF&P, and then I was a private lands biologist with DU, and then now I'm back at Mississippi State, and in my role here, I am a extension instructor, so I'm on the faculty in the Wildlife, Fisheries, and Aquaculture Department, and I'm the waterfowl and upland game bird specialist as far as doing extension work. And so my whole job is to produce outreach materials, whether that's publications, videos, any kind of information, workshops, trainings, that sort of thing, to get information out to landowners who are managing their property for waterfowl, or professionals out there, wildlife professionals and others, that need some extra training on wetland management or management for game birds. And so producing those resources to, like you said, we can publish stuff and take a lot of the research that we're doing on the waterfowl front and the upland game bird front, and getting that in a digestible form to the public. We can publish them in the scientific literature, but if we're not, also publishing that or putting it out in some kind of content that's accessible and consumable from, from to the public, we're not going. What's the point in the science?
Just like scientists talking to scientists, and we're like, and maybe it gets the waterfall biologists that are out there, but not like the habitat managers on the ground or the landowners. Habitat managers for clubs and leases and stuff, and it's not getting around as much.
For sure. And so in all those previous jobs I did a lot of work with private landowners and doing a lot of technical guidance to folks, helping them. And there's a ton of other folks out there that do that kind of work with state waterfowl programs and other agencies, NRCS and others. And so there's a lot of resources like that, like people to get boots on the ground to look at your stuff. But then in addition to that, the type of things that we're going to be delivering with Extension is those extra workshops, and then also just these other resources that after that person's come and visited with you and tell you what to do maybe on your property, there's some other additional resources to kind of help you find information to help you better manage, better understand how to do some moist soil management or managing forested wetlands or whatever it is you're managing for. And so
it's a cool job because it's one of my favorite things to do. I mean, mostly I work with students, I do research, blah blah blah, but when somebody says, hey, could you come out to my wetland and have a look, I mean, it's not like I've got all that time, right? I mean, my time's, I gotta meter it a little bit, but I really enjoy like putting a pair of hip waders on and walking around with somebody and checking out their marsh and giving them, helping out. I really like taking everything we've learned, which is, some pretty heavy duty science. It takes a fair bit of money, a lot of time with students out on the ground, counting ducks, doing plant surveys, water depth surveys, water chemistry surveys and such. But then be able to walk around with somebody and kind of distill that down. I mean, I did that with the folks in Missouri at their lease. I'm like, you guys should do X, Y, Z, and I think you're going to have a lot better shooting. I really enjoy that part of it, and I think you've got a really sweet job that you're going to be able to reach out to a lot of folks across the state of Mississippi and help them.
Sure, and I'm excited about it because, like I said, it's been a lot of years in those previous positions, getting boots on the ground, visiting with landowners, and now I have an opportunity to maybe not get to do that as much, where I actually get out and visit with folks, but producing a lot of the resources that I wish I could have pointed some landowners to. Like after this visit, unless it's hard to. You can write out recommendations and hand them stuff, and there's some level of the conversation that you're having there, they can retain so much, but, I wish I would have some other additional resources to hand some of those folks where they can go back and reference.
They can go back, because they don't always, and they can misinterpret what you said, exactly. But if they can go back and reference them.
And so it's going to be, I'm really excited about getting to start working on building a library of that type of content for folks, and also we're gonna, be developing a podcast too.
But more video-based podcast.
Yes.
As opposed to this format. You'll have both,
we'll do
right?
both, yeah.
But you'll have content from like out in the field too at times.
Yes,
yeah.
And so
that'll be helpful.
And hopes we'll have a lot of video content that will be unrelated, not part of the podcast, but just a lot like a video type,
like
of
informative
YouTube,
stuff,
type channel type thing that'll have a lot of these management resources, and then the podcast can be everything from some of this management stuff that we're going to talk about, but then just kind of some good conversations about game bird management and just a lot of the questions that folks have. Go in a little bit more detail about how certain things work, and maybe even have some healthy debate type stuff. About some
like when sometimes there's a lot of preconceived notions that the public has too about how things work, and I mean, I always listen because sometimes I've had folks bring things to me. I'm like, I haven't thought of it that way. But one of the things they got to understand is in the wildlife field, we've been learning for hundreds of years about this stuff, and we might not have all the answers, but lots of times we might be okay to listen to.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem is it's easy to lose credibility too, because there are folks that have gone out there and told people definitely the wrong thing. That does happen.
Sure.
But most of the time, and I can attest for James himself, he's a knowledgeable kid about this. I say kid, he's not that young anymore. But knowledgeable kid about this stuff, and it's that
it's learning from each other that really matters, right? Like you might learn something from a landowner when you go out and see what they got going on.
Sure.
But you've seen across the landscape lots of different hydrology, lots of different soils, lots of different plant communities. And so you have that background to be able to hopefully provide them with a formula which is going to advance what they're trying to do on their land. You said boots on the ground. We're at your camp. Does this camp have a name? It's
Camp
called
Stump.
Camp Stump. Okay. I'm not going to... Do we disclose where Camp Stump came from or not? We don't even know.
Yeah.
It's just Camp Stump. Okay.
Well, if Bubba was here, he could tell us. But
Okay. So, your evolution as...
I think it's the guy who actually used to live in this camp house.
What?
That's his name. That was his
Stump?
nickname. Stump. The guy that
Okay.
lived here
That
before
lived in
we
this
turned
house.
before he passed away and we
Okay.
developed as a camp.
As a camp.
His
Okay.
his nickname was Stump. So it's in honor
Got
of
it. In honor of Stump. Okay. That's cool. As your evolution, just in general, not like, I don't mean like, I was born and then I did this. But your evolution and like being in the outdoors and how, you know, you ended up going for a degree in wildlife, and did you consider other careers and things like that? Like what was the reason? Why is James who James is today? It's a simple question.
It's a simple question. I guess my uncles got my dad was a big fisherman. He hunted. He grew up here in where we are here in the Delta, Tallahatchie County, and and a farming family. And he grew up quail hunting. Never duck hunted a day in his life, but grew up when quail hunting here in the Delta and dove hunting. And when by the time I came about, he was turned way more into a fisherman. So my uncles took me hunting, and then when they took me duck hunting for the first time, like I think I probably fell in the water and I saw a few wood ducks fly around and maybe like missed 2 or 3, and I think we got lost on the way out, like walking out, and I think my uncle thought James will never go duck hunting again. This is it. And like I got home and he dropped me off at my house, and I turned and I was like, when are we going to go again? Like
that was fun.
That was fun, yeah. And so from that point forward, you know, I kept hunting with them, and then going on, just my passion for waterfowl hunting just grew. And sometime in high school, I think I was most interested in, my best subjects were science and history. And I think at some point, I really thought I was going to be like a history major or something in college early on. And then I actually read a Delta Waterfowl magazine, and they had the highlight on their student researchers, and and that's when I first realized you can go to school.
You can do this for a career, right? It's a thing, yeah.
And I think there was one of the students at that time was Matt Chenard. It was an article on his master's research, and he was a Mississippi State, grad alumni, and so it had Mississippi, that he was from Mississippi State University, and Rick Kaminsky was his advisor, and I was like, oh God, there's right in the backyard, at Mississippi State, you can do this. And so from that point, I never looked back, and I just jumped in, never considered doing anything else. And as soon as I got to Mississippi State, I went and found Rick Kaminsky's office and started working for his grad students and getting experience, and just from that point forward.
And that's where, like, so many of us went through Delta's summer program. I try to get my students involved in going and work, even if it's for like a month or 2 months on the prairies to get their foot in the door.
I was excited to get to do that.
Like you and I both did that.
Yeah,
right. Years apart, but we both did it, and a lot of folks in the field did work for Delta. We just did an episode. This is going to be just around just before Christmas 23, because again, I don't know when this is coming out, of why everybody should be a member of Delta Waterfowl. That's one of the comments, and I think, like, DU and Delta, my comment is, like, I don't care what axe you got to grind with whoever, because there are people that are like, I'm not going to be a member of that. I'm like, if you got $100 sitting around, like, there's no reason. Those two organizations have done more for ducks, duck hunters, and duck habitat on this continent, I think, than any other organization by far. And to me, and what's really funny, and I will put this on here, is when I say that, because like you get these like renew your membership things all the time, and I'm like, I think I already have a membership.
And then, like, in my area, Delta doesn't have dinners, but I'm part of, my wife works for DU, and I'm part of so many committees that I just end up renewing when I go to a dinner. And I'm pretty sure right now that my Delta Waterfowl membership has lapsed. I gotta call them up and be like, considering I just ran this podcast, I should probably renew this thing now. It happens, you know. I usually bump it up. I used to just do like the $35 one or whatever. I'm doing like the one step up. You get like a hat or something. So it adds just a little extra to the kitty for them to help support a student or whatever. You know, there's some big swingers in there that are really running, you know, paying in good money for helping support that stuff. But their general membership matters too. So.
For sure, and both can't go wrong with supporting both of those organizations, like you said.
Yeah. Let me see here. What didn't we cover?
Halliday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy, champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Halliday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Halliday. Halliday, bring it on.
What is it? What do we got left that we were talking about? Other than like, this is the shit I'll cut, right? I'll just like skip over a thing. So
common mistakes.
We're about 45 minutes in, so 50 minutes in.
Common mistakes, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah. So James, the one that I like, and I see common mistakes by habitat managers, you know, pretty regularly. I mean, they can be subtle things, or they can be major things that really like screw up your lease completely for a whole entire year, right? So what are a few common mistakes you see that habitat managers make in the Southeast? Because we got a big area, right? So we're like, this would be applicable to like the Southeast in general, Southeast U.S. So
yeah, I think to me one of the major battles that I seem to fight, that may not be the most appropriate way to put it, but a lot of folks, and it's obvious, you know, you think if you put in a lot of management into something, that's always going to make it better. If you have control over the field or the wetland that you're managing, you know, it's going to have to be better. And that's the thing, to try to get people to step back and think about, do I need to have control over something? So that desire to be able to manipulate water levels or be able to plant something in an area, you know, that's something people reach to a lot. It's like, I think I need to plant something, and it's, you know, particularly for natural kind of functioning wetlands. So not like a moist soil, man-made moist soil unit that's levied up, or an agricultural field or something like that, but like a natural cypress Tupelo slough, or, you know, something like that.
If it's already functioning?
If it's already functioning as a wetland and it's providing habitat and birds are responding to it, don't monkey with it to, you know, think you're going to have some kind of improvement. You having some control or doing something where you feel like you're managing it may not make it better.
Right.
I've seen plenty of wetlands where it's like, well, we were shooting a lot of gadwall in here, and we thought, well, if we were able to drain it and plant some millet in there, that we'd start shooting some more mallards and maybe some pintails or something, you know. And then they drain it, and it messes the hydrology and everything. They put a water control structure in, it messes everything up, and then even the gadwall leave, and they don't have anything.
Should have been happy with your gadwall.
If it's gadwall you're using, just shoot gadwall. It'll be all right. And so that, just thinking that management is always going to make the situation better. A lot of times, it does, you know. But there's some situations where just letting it be function the way it's functioning now, just if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Is kind of one of the major mistakes that I see. Also, too, people trying to get access to things like, well, I want to be able to dig a big ditch so I have a boat road from closer to my camp to the cypress break or whatever the big wetland that they're boating into, and that messes up just kind of the whole hydrology and how it functions, you know, and how the water, how it floods, and it just, that can totally mess up how well that submerged aquatic vegetation and anything associated with it, whether or not it's going to, those conditions are going to be right again to grow that. So a lot of that sort of thing is just something I always caution landowners about. Is like, just if it's doing its job, it's got habitat, and birds are using it, just keep going.
And that's common across a lot of places. We run into that when I go meet with landowners and go look at a wetland. They're like, "What can I do here?" I'm like, "Well, legally you can't do a lot. Like there are protections for." I don't know all Mississippi's laws and stuff. I mean, they're federally protected wetlands, things you can and cannot do.
Yes,
but I'm like, first of all, you can't do that, and second of all, this is how it functions. Like, if you wanted a moist soil wetland, you probably should have bought an old agricultural field and turned it into that. But you've got like a wood swampy hole.
Yeah,
that's forested wetland, and it does flood every year pretty well.
And you're getting into wetland violations and some serious
He's like,
stuff.
well, I want to cut a giant hole in here and dig a hole and put up mounds to sit. I'm like, no.
You're putting fill in a wetland.
You're putting fill in a wetland.
Yeah, that's a bad deal.
I mean, people do it and get away with it, but lots of times they get pinched on that.
Yeah.
And it's pretty noticeable from the road.
Something to caution folks about. And another thing, too, just that thought that you have to plant something. If you have capabilities to manage the water levels and manage for moist soil, that may be way better than if you planted something. I mean, I've gone on site visits and gone out into a place, and they just got all these weeds out here. We want to disc it, but we want you to plant it, but we want you to tell us what to plant. And I go walking through there, and within just a few seconds of glancing around, it's like, you've got all the duck food in the world right here.
It's like sticking to your pants and it's on your boots.
There's just barnyard grass.
There's just seeds everywhere.
And panic grass and everything, that ducks love. Smartweed and everything out there, all these annual grasses. And, you're going to disc under duck food to plant duck food that you paid for. This is free. Yeah, this is free.
That is less nutritionally complete, too.
Exactly.
It's not like I'll just go with corn, right? Like, corn's great if you can get water to it, if the ducks find it, and but it's not nutritionally complete. Like if you feed a mallard corn 100% of the time, it dies. Like people are, no, I can't do it. Corn is good. I mean, it's got high carbohydrates. There's actually a lot of nutrients in it, but it doesn't have all of the protein, all of the essential nutrients, and so. Yeah. But the moist soil plants actually have all of just about complete nutrition with a few bugs and stuff that are in there too.
I was going to say the bugs is the other thing. There's going to be a lot more bugs in those moist soil wetlands than there are, and so those protein resources are important. So and that's and added on to that, another thing is not really when planning out on your property what kind of wetland management you need to do, or what kind of foraging habitat you are going to try to provide on the property, is thinking about the greater landscape around you. Ducks aren't just using your property, they're using the landscape around you. Take a look around, see what if there's folks around you that are flooding up areas and managing for ducks, what are they providing, and what do you think might be missing on the landscape that you could fill in? So if everybody around you is doing flooded harvested crops and planting some hot crops, and there's some forested stuff around you and some scrub shrub wetlands around you. If there's not a whole lot of moist soil other than just what's in those scrub shrub and forested areas, maybe moist soil is your ticket to provide a little bit of that missing piece.
Well, and maybe not just good for ducks for their nutrition, but also if it's that missing piece, it's like when you walk to the refrigerator, you do this, is you open the door and you're like, there's something I'm craving right now, and you're like walking around your kitchen looking for it. And sometimes for a duck, it might be moist soil. If they're getting all the other things they need elsewhere, you don't want to do the same thing as your neighbor, because all you're doing is competing over the same
need.
You'd be like, what everybody bring for Thanksgiving dinner? Well, everybody brought apple pie. Wow. Right? There's too much apple pie out there.
Somebody should have brought the green bean casserole.
Right. Somebody needs to bring the green bean casserole. That's a good analogy for moist soil. So, yeah.
That and the last one, I think that, and this isn't really like a mistake, but kind of like a misconception, I guess, on at least far as down here, is that like ducks showing up like after the duck season.
Oh yeah. That's a good one.
That's a good one. That's probably for a whole nother discussion on.
Yeah, I mean, I cover. We've talked about it a little bit. I mean, it is just like we put telemetry units on birds, and they just redistribute. They leave safe places, and you don't even see them. Like when you drive through the Delta, you don't even see where a lot of these ducks are sitting. I mean, it's so flat, it's hidden.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of places that might not be getting hunted that aren't even like National Wildlife Refuge or anything, where birds are just sitting and then night feeding a little bit. But once once the guns stop going off, they just redistribute, and then you can see them right off the
There's
side
some
of
of
the road
that,
or
but then
something.
there's also the fact that there's tons of these places that are leased out, that folks have leases on, that are flooded harvested ag crops, so there's a lot of water on the landscape in there. And like when duck season's over with, farmers want to get back in there, understandably, to start getting ready for the work they're going to have to do in the spring to start planting crops. And so a lot of water just gets
They pull the boards.
and so a lot of the available wetland out there is now gone.
Yeah.
And so they're concentrating on what water's left. And so, like, even though some of them are coming out of hiding and moving around, there's a lot to be said for that board pulling effect of, like, there's just a lot of habitat that leaves right there. I at least from what I can see from,
Do you think
going around
that's a
Delta.
separate subject, but do you think that's necessary, or could you at least leave them for like 2 weeks after season,
Yeah, and
most of the time, without interfering with farming still?
I think so. I think there's some but I'd probably more conversation have some more farmers in there than than asking me.
Yeah.
I'd love to say for 100%. Yeah,
But 2 weeks to me just doesn't. I don't know. It's a long growing
Yeah.
season here, but you can plant early here too. I mean, when it starts
That's
to
the
warm
thing.
up, it starts fast.
People were getting at it pretty quick.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, now we're in New York. We're doing water. Sometimes we start our waterfowl surveys like second week of March, maybe even early. Like they're already getting back. If it's warm, spring's warming up faster. They're getting there pretty quick. So
a lot of the site visits I do and used to do in February, if they wanted me to come right after duck season, take a look at stuff and talk to them, and like these birds just showed up, and I think a lot of that is like, well, there's a bunch of stuff flooded around you and now it's not, so they're coming here. It's kind of like they didn't just show up. It's kind of like, if you had 3 restaurants in your small town and 2 of them closed, you went to the one you always go to and it was the one that stayed open, you wouldn't think your population of your town doubled.
right. That's a good analogy.
You would,
I like
you
that,
know that just they didn't have anywhere else to eat.
The other thing I can point out, and this is from living up north mostly, working on Lake Ontario all winter, doing duck research, is that by about the 3rd week of January, I mean, it's like right till about the 2nd week of January, I think ducks are still moving. But end of January, around the 31st, days are getting longer. The only way, like at some point in a duck's brain, when days start getting long, the only place they're going is back north. Like, there is not a lot of movement. Like, wherever a duck seems to want to be by that time of year, they just really try to stick it out. I don't think that there is very much migration south, like super, super late in the year.
No.
We'd have to chat with, like, some of the folks that are doing telemetry stuff in Tennessee and Arkansas. Like, how much, that'd be a good question. Like, how much movement, even south after that, is there? I bet you it's a lot of random walk stuff where they're just jumping around looking for food in general. So, well, James, this has been great. Really appreciate you having me here.
Yeah.
Really appreciate having you on, and I really like these candid kind of conversations. It's cool doing it in a real Mississippi duck camp and deer camp too. There's a lot of nice racks on the wall here, and real cool family traditions and such here over the years. But what would you, if you had a piece of advice to, as I said, we're not like the next generation of duck hunters. We've already moved into, like, I don't know what we are. We're like Generation X or something like that. I don't know what they are. Generation Quack. Boy, that was corny. But we're not like the new up and comings. We're getting a little like we're kind of bygone. But we've seen enough stuff. We're middle-aged duck hunters, right? We're not cranky old ducks yet. But if you had one thing, like, to this new group, the 20-somethings coming in to duck hunting, or the teenagers and 20-somethings, like, what advice would you give them? Just broad advice about, like, how to enjoy the duck culture across duck country in the United States.
Yeah, I guess for me, I would say, of course, most of us all, pretty over time see, like, our motivations for hunting and such change over time, and what that experience means to us kind of changes some. But I would say, to just to me, not focusing as much on killing a limit of ducks and some of that experience of just having that, obviously it's about killing ducks a lot. We can't forget that part. We're out there to shoot ducks. We enjoy shooting ducks. If we can, we want to shoot ducks. But place some less focus on that limit, because really the limit that's our measure of success, kind of at a lot of folks. And if the limit was 4 instead of 6, if we're shooting 4 with a 4 duck limit, we're super satisfied. But if the limit's 6 and we shoot 4, it's the same number of birds, but we're not as satisfied. So maybe not focus on that as much, just the fact that you're shooting some ducks, and kind of think more about the experience and the time you have with your friends and family. Like we didn't kill or even come close to killing a bird today.
Right.
We
got a great picture
had a great picture with
folks we haven't been with in a while.
We haven't shared a blind in 15, 16 years or more.
Yeah.
And that made my experience today. This weekend, even if we don't shoot any ducks in March, it's going to be a fantastic hunt or hunting weekend. So that put a little bit more on that, just that what those other experiences are, and not place as much on the limit. But
still be able to enjoy it even when you're not always killing. So good stuff. Well, I think Bubba's back, and see if they got any deer.
Yeah, maybe we might be blood tracking something.
We might be blood tracking something. We might be getting called in for that. So thank you, James. Sean sat over quietly and looked at every meme on all the internets, so he's got that covered.
Darn right.
Y'all have a good one. See you next time in the Kitchen Conversations. Thanks for hanging with us, and as always, may your skies be filled and shoot straight, my friends.